Free will doesn't make any sense. And I don't mean that as an exaggeration. We know more about the gravitational forces of distant galaxies than we know about why you chose to listen to this podcast. We understand more about the chemical reactions in stars than we do about how you decided what to have for breakfast this morning. The thing we call choice collapses under even the slightest scrutiny. Yet, it's something that every single person who has ever existed believes they experience hundreds of times each day. That is the paradox of free will. It is simultaneously the most obvious and the most impossible thing we claim to possess. So obvious, in fact, that for most of human history, free will was taken at face value. You choose because you choose. You decide because you decide. You're responsible for your actions because you are. Questioning it was considered a bit of a fool's errand, like asking why you have thoughts or why you feel like you. But eventually those cracks started to appear. Neuroscientists, philosophers, physicists, and even ordinary people paying close attention to their own minds all came to the same uncomfortable conclusion. Choice isn't as straightforward as it feels. If free will is so obvious, why can neuroscientists predict your decisions before you're consciously aware of making them? Why do entire philosophical traditions describe the will as an illusion? And why do physicists, the very people who claim to understand causation, tell us that everything, including your brain, follows deterministic laws that leave no room for genuine choice? The rabbit hole of free will goes deep, way deeper than you think. From personal experiments with decision-making to sprawling systems of philosophy to cutting-edge neuroscience, we find the same impossible situation. What we think of as choice comes in layers, and the deeper you go, the stranger it gets. So, let's dive in.
Level 1. The experience of choice. Level 1 is the surface, the one we all start on, the one we all feel every waking moment. This is your immediate, undeniable sense that you are the author of your actions. You wake up this morning and choose to hit snooze or get up. You choose coffee over tea. You choose what clothes to wear, what route to take to work, what to say in conversations. Every moment feels like a branching path where you, the conscious, deciding you, weighs options and selects one. This experience feels self-evident. When you reach for your phone, you feel like you're directing your hand. When you speak, you feel like you're choosing words. When you change your mind about something, you feel like you're the one doing the changing. The experience of choice seems to have clear components. You become aware of options, you deliberate, you feel yourself deciding, and then you act. It's a natural sequence that plays out thousands of times a day, but if you pay attention, really pay attention, to your own decision-making, things start to feel less solid. Try this right now. Decide to think of a random number between 1 and 100. Did you choose that number or did it just appear? Can you explain why your mind selected that specific number instead of any other? Did you generate it or did it emerge from some unconscious process and then get delivered to your awareness? When you really examine the experience of choice, it becomes slippery. Decisions seem to bubble up from somewhere you can't access, and then your conscious mind takes credit for them after the fact. The experience of free will is like being the narrator of a story you're not actually writing. Level 2. The neuroscience of decision. At level 2, we start looking under the hood. Here, choice isn't just a subjective experience, it's a physical process happening in your brain. And when neuroscientists examine that process closely, the traditional picture of free will starts to crumble. The most famous experiment was conducted by Benjamin Libet in the 1980s. Participants were asked to perform a simple action, flex their wrist whenever they felt like it. They watched a clock and reported the moment they first became aware of their intention to move. Meanwhile, electrodes measured brain activity. The results were shocking. The brain showed a readiness potential, a buildup of electrical activity, several hundred milliseconds before people reported being conscious of their intention to move. In other words, their brains had already committed to the action before they were aware of deciding to act. Later experiments pushed this even further. Using fMRI scanners, researchers could predict with 70 to 80% accuracy whether someone would choose to press a left or right button up to 10 seconds before the person reported making the decision. 10 seconds. That's not a split-second delay, that's your brain making choices and then informing you about them after the fact. But it gets stranger. Consider the neuroscience of preference. When you choose chocolate over vanilla, that preference emerges from the interplay of memory systems, reward pathways, genetic predispositions, blood sugar levels, recent experiences, and countless other factors operating below conscious awareness. Your dopamine system has already calculated the expected reward value of each option based on past experiences. Your memory systems have retrieved associations. Maybe vanilla reminds you of childhood birthday parties, or chocolate connects to a stressful period when you craved sugar. Your current physiological state influences the calculation. By the time you're consciously choosing, the decision has largely been made by unconscious processes you have no access to or control over. The neuroscientist Robert Sapolsky puts it bluntly: show me a decision, and I'll show you the neurobiological events that preceded and caused it. At level 2, the unsettling realization is this: you don't choose. Your brain chooses and then creates the experience of choosing for you. Level 3, the deterministic universe. At this level, we zoom out from individual brains to the entire physical universe. Here, the problem with free will becomes even more fundamental. If everything follows the laws of physics, where is there room for genuine choice? Consider the basic structure of causation. Every event is caused by prior events, which were caused by still earlier events, stretching back in an unbroken chain to the Big Bang. Your brain is made of atoms, and atoms follow physical laws. The electrical activity in your neurons is governed by the same electromagnetic forces that power lightning and magnets. When a neuron fires, it's not because some non-physical will decided to fire it. It fires because specific chemicals reach specific concentration thresholds, causing ion channels to open in response to electrochemical gradients, all following precise physical laws. This is the determinist picture. The universe is like a vast, complex machine. Given the exact position and momentum of every particle at any moment, the future is already determined. Your brain is part of this machine, and what you experience as choice is simply the subjective feeling of being a complex information processing system following its programming. Pierre-Simon Laplace famously imagined a hypothetical intellect that could know the precise location and momentum of every atom in the universe. This intellect would be able to predict the entire future and retrodict the entire past, because everything would be determined by the laws of physics. In this view, your decision to listen to this podcast was already inevitable when the universe began 13.8 billion years ago. Every thought you've had, every choice you've made, every feeling of deliberation and decision, all of it was locked in by the initial conditions and physical laws. Of course, quantum mechanics adds some wrinkles to this picture. At the subatomic level, events appear to be genuinely random rather than strictly determined. But randomness doesn't help free will either. If your choices are random, they're not freely willed. They're just arbitrary. Either your decisions are determined by prior causes, in which case you're not free, or they're random, in which case they're not really yours in any meaningful sense. Level 3 leaves us with a stark conclusion. In a physical universe governed by natural laws, free will appears to be not just unlikely, but literally impossible. Level 4. The psychological construction of choice. If Level 3 shows that free will is physically impossible, Level 4 reveals how we construct the illusion anyway. This is where we examine the psychological mechanisms that create our sense of agency, even when that agency is fictional. The human brain is a storytelling machine. It takes the chaotic stream of sensory data, internal sensations, and neural activity and weaves it into a coherent narrative about a choosing, deciding, controlling self. Consider confabulation, the tendency to create explanations for our actions even when those explanations are clearly false. Split-brain patients, people whose corpus callosum has been severed, provide dramatic examples. When researchers show information only to the right hemisphere, which can't speak, and that hemisphere directs the left hand to perform an action, the verbal left hemisphere will confidently invent a reason for why they chose to do it. We all do this, constantly. Social psychologists have shown that our reasons for our preferences, decisions, and behaviors are largely post hoc rationalizations. We act first, then construct explanations later. The choice supportive bias shows that we even retroactively change our preferences to match our decisions. After choosing between two equally attractive options, we suddenly find more reasons to like what we chose and dislike what we rejected, even though the choice may have been essentially arbitrary. Our sense of agency is also highly manipulable. In experiments, people can be made to feel responsible for outcomes they clearly didn't cause, or to feel that they chose actions they were obviously forced to perform. The feeling of choosing is separate from the act of choosing. The psychologist Daniel Wegner called this the illusion of conscious will, the strong subjective experience that we are the authors of our thoughts and actions, even when evidence clearly shows we are not. At level 4, we see that the experience of free will is a psychological construction, useful for social coordination and self-understanding, but not necessarily accurate about how decisions actually work. Level 5. The social reality of choice. Even if free will is physically impossible and psychologically constructed, it remains socially essential. This is where we examine how the belief in choice shapes human civilization. Our entire legal system is built on the assumption of free will. We hold people responsible for their actions because we believe they could have chosen differently. We punish criminals not just to protect society, but because we believe they deserve punishment for their freely chosen wrongs. Our economic system assumes rational actors making free choices in markets. The whole concept of personal responsibility, moral praise and blame, promises and contracts, all of it depends on the assumption that people are the authors of their actions. Even our sense of personal identity is wrapped up in choice. You are the sum of your decisions. Your character is revealed through your choices. Your life story is a narrative of the paths you chose and the paths you rejected. But what happens when a society stops believing in free will? Some research suggests that people who are taught that free will is an illusion subsequently behave less ethically. They cheat more, help others less, and act more aggressively. The belief in choice, even if false, may be necessary for moral behavior. This creates a fascinating paradox. Free will might be simultaneously false and necessary. False is a description of how human decision-making actually works, but necessary as a social fiction that enables cooperation, justice, and meaning. Some philosophers argue for compatibilism, the idea that free will is compatible with determinism. They redefine free will not as the ability to have chosen otherwise in identical circumstances, but as acting according to your own desires without external coercion. Others embrace hard determinism and argue we should restructure society around the truth of our lack of free will, focusing on rehabilitation rather than punishment, understanding rather than blame. At level 5, choice becomes less about individual psychology and more about collective meaning-making and social organization. Level 6, the experience of no self. At this level, we move beyond scientific and philosophical analysis to direct experiential investigation. Because for thousands of years, contemplatives and meditators have been reporting something that directly challenges the conventional experience of choice, the discovery that there is no chooser. Through sustained attention to the moment-by-moment process of experience, meditators report that thoughts, sensations, emotions, and even decisions simply arise in awareness without a central controller. There's no self behind the process making choices, just the process itself unfolding. The Buddha described this as anatta, or no self. There is experience, but no permanent, unchanging experiencer. There are thoughts, but no thinker. There are choices, but no chooser. This isn't just philosophical speculation. Modern practitioners using techniques like mindfulness, meditation, self-inquiry, or psychedelic experiences often report similar insights. The sense of being a separate self that controls thoughts and actions dissolves, replaced by the recognition that experience is simply happening by itself. Sam Harris, both a neuroscientist and meditation practitioner, describes it this way: "You are not controlling your thoughts and actions. You are witnessing them arise in consciousness. The feeling of being an agent is itself just another appearance in consciousness." What's striking is how liberating this realization can be. Instead of the burden of being responsible for every thought and action, there's a recognition that life is simply unfolding according to its own nature. Decisions happen, actions occur, but the anxious sense of being the one who must figure everything out dissolves. This experiential level points to something beyond the free will debate entirely. The possibility that the whole framework of chooser and chosen, controller and controlled is based on a fundamental misunderstanding of what we are. At level 6, the question isn't whether we have free will, but whether there's a we to have it in the first place. Level 7, the mystery of emergence. Finally, we reach the deepest level, where all our categories and explanations give way to the fundamental mystery of consciousness and choice. Because here's what's truly strange. Even if every argument against free will is correct, even if decisions are determined by prior causes, constructed by psychological processes, experienced as illusion, and socially maintained as fiction, something is still choosing. Not you, perhaps, in the way you typically think of yourself, but something is navigating options, weighing possibilities, and selecting among alternatives. The universe has evolved information processing systems capable of modeling possible futures and acting to bring some of them about. This is the mystery of emergence. Simple physical laws operating on mindless particles somehow give rise to systems that can contemplate those very laws. Deterministic processes somehow generate the experience of choice, even if choice itself is illusory. Maybe free will is like consciousness itself, not something you have, but something you are. Not a power you wield, but the process by which the universe comes to know itself and influence its own future. The physicist Murray Gell-Mann distinguished between strong emergence, where higher-level properties are genuinely irreducible to lower levels, and weak emergence, where complex behavior arises from simple rules but is still theoretically predictable. Perhaps choice is strongly emergent, a genuine novelty that appears when information processing reaches sufficient complexity. Or perhaps it's weakly emergent, determined by underlying processes, but still meaningful at its own level of description. Either way, the fact that anything experiences itself as choosing is remarkable. That the universe has evolved subsystems that can model counterfactuals, experience regret, plan for the future, and feel responsible for outcomes, this is extraordinary, regardless of whether it meets some philosophical definition of free will. At level 7, we're left not with answers, but with deeper questions. What is the relationship between consciousness and choice? How does subjective experience emerge from objective processes? What does it mean for information to experience itself as making decisions? The journey through the 7 levels of free will doesn't just reveal how strange choice is, it reveals how strange it is that there's anyone here to wonder about it at all. Maybe free will isn't one thing or 7 things. Maybe it's like asking whether a symphony is real, meaningless at the level of atoms vibrating in air, but undeniably meaningful at the level of human experience. Perhaps the deepest truth isn't that we have free will or that we don't. Perhaps it's that the question itself points to something more fundamental, the mystery of how conscious experience arises from unconscious processes, how meaning emerges from mechanism, how the universe wakes up to itself. Whether your decision to think about free will was determined by prior causes, constructed by your psychology, or emerged from some deeper mystery, you're thinking about it now. And that fact, that there is something it is like to contemplate your own agency, remains extraordinary. The illusion of free will might be just that, an illusion. But if so, it's an illusion that has allowed the universe to become conscious of itself, to question its own nature, and to wonder whether it's really choosing anything at all. And maybe that's enough.